There's a devastating moment many people face at some point in their lives, the moment when they look at everything they've built and realize they have to start over. The relationship that lasted years ended. The career that seemed secure collapsed. The business you dedicated everything to failed. The person you thought you were no longer exists. And you find yourself in a place you don't recognize, feeling like all those years were a complete waste, that you're back at zero, that you must begin from nothing, as if you'd never lived everything you lived. But there's something you need to understand with absolute clarity before taking a single step forward. You're not starting from zero. You're never starting from zero when you've lived, when you've tried, when you've failed, when you've learned. You're starting with something infinitely more valuable than a beginner's optimistic ignorance. You're starting with wisdom, with knowledge gained through real experience, not untested theory, with scars that taught you lessons no book can transmit, with clarity about what works and what doesn't, that only comes from having tried both. The Stoics understood something that modern, easy success culture completely ignores: that the failure forcing you to restart isn't the end of your story. It's the moment when you finally have enough wisdom to write the right version of that story. Marcus Aurelius lost multiple children. He faced betrayals from people he trusted. He saw his plans destroyed by circumstances beyond his control. Each loss could have broken him. Instead, he wrote something that has resonated for 2,000 years. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. That phrase isn't empty optimism. It's profound recognition that the obstacles, failures, losses forcing you to restart aren't deviations from your path. They are the path itself. They're exactly the experiences you needed to develop the character, wisdom, strength you'll require for the next phase. You're not lost. You're not behind. You're not starting late. You're exactly where you need to be, with exactly the lessons you needed to learn. But modern culture sells you a toxic narrative, that starting over is admission of total failure, that if you had to restart, it means you're weak, that successful people never have to start over because everything goes right the first time. That narrative is a complete lie. The most successful, wisest, most fulfilled people who have ever existed had to restart multiple times. The difference is they didn't treat each restart as a clean slate where they ignored everything learned. They treated it as an upgrade, as improvement based on real data, as the next iteration informed by all the previous ones. Epictetus was born a slave. He didn't choose that circumstance. He was physically abused until permanently crippled. When he finally gained freedom, he had nothing. Zero external resources. He could have said, "I'm starting from zero," and felt defeated. Instead, he recognized he was starting with something no circumstance could take away: his capacity to choose how to respond, his rational faculty, his internal freedom. And from that foundation, he built a philosophical life that influenced emperors and changed the history of Western thought. When you find yourself in a position where you must restart, you have two fundamental options. You can treat it as defeat, confirming all your insecurities about yourself. Or you can treat it like the Stoics, as opportunity to apply everything you learned from the previous path to build something better this time. Not because the previous path was a mistake, because the previous path was training. It was the necessary education, so this time you can do it with wisdom you didn't have before. Seneca, one of the richest men in the Roman Empire, lost his wealth multiple times. He was exiled. He was forced to restart from positions that seemed impossible. And each time, instead of lamenting what was lost, He used the experience to refine his philosophy, to strengthen his character, to clarify what truly mattered. He wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body." He wasn't romanticizing suffering. He was recognizing the reality that pressure creates strength that comfort can never generate. This isn't a motivational speech designed to make you feel better temporarily without changing anything real. This is practical philosophical training to transform how you experience the restart process. The 10 Stoic forms we'll explore are specific tools, tested over centuries, that convert what looks like devastation into solid foundation for superior construction. Each form is concrete practice you can implement today, not abstract theory that sounds good, but you don't know how to apply. What separates those who rise stronger after having to restart from those who remain broken isn't innate talent or luck or favorable circumstances. It's mindset. It's the capacity to reframe the restart not as evidence of failure, but as opportunity to apply gained wisdom. It's recognizing you're not at a disadvantage for having failed before. You're at an advantage because you know things that someone genuinely starting from zero cannot know. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself every morning, "When you arise, say to yourself, 'Today I will meet with people who are meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, dishonest, envious, antisocial. But none of these things can harm me because I cannot be forced to act in a degrading way.'" Applied to restarting, this means, this process will be difficult, there will be obstacles, there will be moments when you want to give up. But none of that can truly harm you unless you choose to abandon your virtue, your integrity, your commitment to being who you decided to be. The difference between weakness and strength isn't measured by whether you've had to restart. It's measured by how you respond when it's your turn. The weak person plays victim, complains about injustice, uses the past as perpetual excuse not to act in the present. The strong person accepts what happened, extracts every available lesson, and builds from there with wisdom they didn't have before. They don't pretend the pain didn't exist. They simply refuse to let that pain define them or paralyze them. Epictetus taught something that sounds harsh, but is profoundly liberating. Don't demand that events happen as you wish. Wish them to happen as they do happen, and you will live well. Your life didn't turn out as planned. You had to restart. You can spend infinite energy resenting that reality, or you can accept it completely and ask, "Given that this is what happened, how do I build from here?" Only the second option generates power. The first only generates perpetual suffering. Before continuing, you need to make a specific commitment. Not a vague promise you forget tomorrow. A concrete declaration that anchors this moment of clarity. Go to the comments and write, "I will no longer be weak. I begin with wisdom." Those words are your acknowledgement that you've seen the truth, that this restart isn't punishment, but opportunity. That you're not at a disadvantage, but in an advantageous position because you have real experience. That you won't be the weak version of yourself that plays victim, but the strong version that builds. Do it now. Pause, go to the comments, write, "I will no longer be weak. I begin with wisdom." That act of public declaration, even if just with strangers on the internet, makes your commitment real in a way that private thought never achieves. The Stoics knew the power of externalized vows. They knew that declaring your intention dramatically increases the probability of fulfilling it. What follows are the 10 specific forms through which you transform an apparently devastating restart into foundation for a superior life. Each form is concrete action, not abstract inspiration. Each form has been tested by people who faced infinitely worse circumstances than yours and still rose stronger. And each form, if you implement it with brutal honesty, will transform you into a person who not only survives the restart, but builds from it, something that would never have been possible without the wisdom only that restart could teach you. This is your moment, not in a month when you feel ready, not next year when circumstances are better. Now, with the life you have, with the lessons you learned, with the wisdom you gained. You are no longer weak. You begin with wisdom. Before we begin, I want you to declare your commitment by leaving in the comments, "I will no longer be weak. I begin with wisdom." That phrase will be a reminder that you're here to recognize your experience as strength, not as burden. This is the moment to prove to yourself that you're not starting from zero, that every lesson learned prepared you to build something better. Without further ado, let's begin. First Stoic form redefines starting as continuing with wisdom. The first devastating mistake people make when they must restart is treating it as if everything before was a total waste of time. As if the years invested, the experiences lived, the lessons learned don't count for anything because the final result wasn't what they imagined. This starting from zero narrative is the enemy of your progress because it denies the only real advantage you have over someone genuinely starting without experience. Wisdom gained through real trial and error, not untested theory. Marcus Aurelius understood something fundamental about the nature of human progress, that it's not a straight ascending line, but a spiral where you revisit similar themes but from higher levels of understanding. He wrote, "Look within. Within is the fountain of good, and it can always spring if you always dig. When you restart, you're not digging from the surface again. You're digging from a deeper level, with more refined tools, with knowledge of where not to dig because you already tried there. The crucial redefinition you must make is this. You're not erasing your history to start a new story. You're writing the next chapter of the same story, but now with the wisdom the previous chapters taught you. Every mistake you made in the past is data informing this present. Every relationship that ended taught you what you truly value in human connection. Every project that failed showed you which methods don't work. That information is pure gold if you stop treating it as evidence of failure and start treating it as expensive education you already paid for. Epictetus taught his students something that directly confronts the starting from zero narrative. It is impossible for someone to begin learning what they think they already know. When you pretend you know nothing, when you deny the experience you have, when you act like a beginner when you're not, you waste your only competitive advantage. You're not a beginner. You're a veteran with scars. And those scars are maps of territory you explored, so this time you can navigate more efficiently. The practical application of this first form requires a specific wisdom inventory exercise. Take paper and write honestly. What did I learn from the previous path that I didn't know when starting it? Not vague generalities. Specific lessons. You learned that a certain type of person is toxic for you. You learned that a certain work method doesn't match your temperament. You learned that certain values are negotiable for you and others aren't. You learned how much pressure you can sustain before needing rest. Each of those lessons has enormous value that a beginner doesn't have. Seneca practiced this systematically after every setback. When he lost wealth, when he was exiled, when projects failed, he didn't ask himself, "Why did this happen to me?" He asked himself, "What did this teach me?" And he extracted every available lesson before moving to the next step. That practice converted every apparent loss into educational investment. He didn't waste the pain by experiencing it without processing it. He processed it completely to extract wisdom that only that specific pain could teach. When you redefine restart as informed continuation instead of starting from zero, it completely changes your energy. You no longer feel the paralyzing desperation of, I have to do everything again. You feel the focused clarity of, now I know how to do it better. Starting without experience. You compare yourself to who you were one chapter ago, recognizing that each chapter prepared you for the next. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, don't waste time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Applied to restart. This means don't waste time lamenting that your life wasn't as expected. Use the life that was to inform the life you'll build. There's no time for resentment. There's only time for action informed by experience. The redefinition also protects you against a common trap, idealizing the past or completely demonizing it. Some people restart and romanticize everything previous as the good times. Others treat it as wasted years. Both perspectives are false. The past was simply experience. It had good and bad moments. It had wise decisions and mistakes. And all of that, the totality of that mixed experience, is exactly the education you needed to be prepared for this present moment. Epictetus taught using the actor metaphor, you've been assigned a new role in the play of your life. It's not the role you had before. But you don't perform this new role like a beginner who's never been on stage. You perform it with all the stage experience the previous roles gave you. You know how to handle pressure. You know how to recover from live mistakes. You know how to connect with the audience. All of that transfers to the new role, even though the specific role is different. You can implement this redefinition through a simple morning practice. Every morning of this restart, before starting your day, say out loud, I'm not starting from zero. I'm continuing with gained wisdom. Repeat the 3 most important lessons the previous chapter taught you. That daily reminder anchors your mindset in the advantage you have instead of an imaginary deficit. Seneca observed, it is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult. Restarting seems impossibly difficult when you frame it as starting from zero with nothing. It seems challenging but manageable when you frame it as continuing with wisdom I didn't have before. The mental frame shift doesn't change external circumstances, but it completely changes your capacity to respond to those circumstances. The redefinition also eliminates destructive comparison with others who never had to restart. Those people, if they exist, aren't more fortunate than you. They're less prepared. They've never developed the resilience muscle you developed. They've never learned lessons that only failure teaches. They've never tested their character under real pressure. You have. And that difference is an advantage, not a disadvantage, if you stop treating it as shame and start treating it as strength. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Your need to restart isn't an obstacle to your progress. It's the very path of your progress. It's exactly the experience you needed to develop wisdom you were missing. Without it, you would have continued on a path that would eventually lead to a greater crisis. The restart is a course correction that looks like disaster, but is actually salvation. In the end, redefining restart as continuation with wisdom isn't optimistic self-deception, it's realistic recognition of truth. That experience has value even when the outcome wasn't desired. That wisdom gained through real error is worth more than untested theory. That you're not at a disadvantage for having failed, you're at an advantage for having learned. And that advantage, if you recognize it and use it, makes this chapter superior to the previous one, not despite the restart, but precisely because of it. Second Stoic form: establish your new direction from virtue, not from compensation. There's a fatal mistake almost everyone makes when restarting. They define their new direction based on what they lost, rather than on who they want to be. They restart to recover lost money, to prove to those who judged them that they were wrong, to make up for wasted time by being twice as productive now. All these motivations are poisoned from the root because they're externally focused on results and validations you don't control, rather than internally on character you completely control. Marcus Aurelius faced constant temptation to define his reign as emperor by visible external achievements. Territories conquered, buildings constructed, wealth accumulated. Instead, he asked himself something radically different. What kind of emperor do I want to be? What virtues do I want to embody regardless of outcomes? And he defined his direction by internal qualities: wisdom in decisions, justice in dealings, courage in adversity, temperance in absolute power. Those virtues were his true north, not external achievements that could be destroyed by circumstances beyond his control. The problem with basing your restart on compensation is that it keeps you mentally trapped in the past. If you restart to recover what was lost, you're still living in relation to that loss. If you restart to prove something to others, you're still a prisoner of their opinions. If you restart to make up for lost time, you're still resentful about that time instead of grateful for lessons learned. All these external motivations generate frantic action without clear direction, because the real goal isn't who you become, but external results you don't control. Epictetus taught something that sounds simple but is profoundly transformative. First, decide who you want to be. Then do what you must do, not the other way around. Not first do things and hope they eventually make you someone good. First clarity about character, then action aligned with that character. When you define your direction from virtue, every decision has clear criteria. Does this bring me closer to the virtuous person I decided to be, or move me away? The practical application of this second form requires a brutal honesty exercise. Examine your real motivations for this restart. Why are you really doing this? If the answer includes prove, recover, make up for, show, you're building on an unstable foundation of external need. You need to redefine from virtue. Ask yourself differently. Regardless of outcomes, what kind of person do I want to be during this process? What core virtue will guide every decision? Seneca practiced this by choosing a specific virtue as a theme for periods of his life. One period focused on cultivating wisdom through deep study and reflection. Another focused on courage by taking actions he feared. Another on temperance, practicing deliberate moderation. He didn't choose these virtues to impress others or achieve specific results. He chose them because he wanted to develop character that would remain regardless of changing external circumstances. The four cardinal Stoic virtues are wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. When you restart, choose one as your central virtue for this chapter. If you choose wisdom, every decision is evaluated by: Does this increase my understanding and discernment? If you choose courage, every decision asks, does this require bravery, and am I acting bravely? If you choose justice, you evaluate, is this fair and right regardless of convenience? If you choose temperance, you ask, does this show moderation and self-control? Marcus Aurelius wrote, reject your sense of injury, and the injury itself disappears. When you define your restart from internal virtue rather than external validation, you save yourself from the endless cycle of chasing approval that never satisfies. You no longer need others to recognize your progress because your metric is internal. Did I act with virtue today? If yes, the day was successful regardless of external results. If not, you learned where you need to strengthen character. Direction from virtue also gives you stability that direction from results can never provide. External results fluctuate due to 1,000 factors beyond your control. Markets change, people disappoint you, plans fail. If your direction depends on those results, you're constantly shaken by external circumstances, but virtue is completely under your control. You can choose to act with wisdom, courage, justice, temperance, regardless of what happens externally. Epictetus taught, there is only one way to happiness, and that is to cease worrying about things which are beyond the power of our will. Your character, your virtues, your integrity, these are completely within the power of your will. Results, others' opinions, recognition, these are outside. When you define direction from what you control, virtue, rather than what you don't control, results, you achieve peace that external pursuit never provides. You can implement this by writing a personal virtue declaration for this restart, a specific phrase that defines who you'll be regardless of results. Not, I will be successful, because success is vague and external, but I will be wise in decisions, brave in action, just in treatment of others, moderate in behavior. That declaration becomes your daily criterion. Did I live according to this today? Seneca observed, it is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more. That is poor. When you pursue restart from compensation, you'll always desire more, because it's never enough to fill the internal void. When you pursue from virtue, every day you act virtuously is enough, because the goal was character, not external accumulation. You're no longer poor waiting for future results. You're rich with present character. Virtue as direction also transforms how you experience obstacles. When your goal is external result and you encounter an obstacle, it's frustration that stops you. When your goal is virtue and you encounter an obstacle, it's opportunity to demonstrate that virtue. Financial obstacle becomes a chance to show wisdom and moderation. Social rejection becomes opportunity to demonstrate courage and integrity. The obstacle literally becomes the way, because it gives you opportunity to exercise exactly the virtue you're cultivating. Marcus Aurelius wrote, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That power over your mind includes power to choose virtue as your direction, regardless of external events. No one can prevent you from being wise in your decisions. No one can force you to abandon courage. No one can take away your commitment to justice. No one can control your temperance. These are completely yours. And when your restart is directed by them, no one can make you truly fail, because success no longer depends on external factors. In the end, establishing direction from virtue rather than compensation isn't rejecting ambition or denying you want positive results. It's anchoring your well-being in what you control, so external results are appreciated bonuses, but not requirements for your peace. It's building on the rock of character rather than the sand of circumstances. And that difference determines whether your restart generates sustainable life or just another cycle of chasing external validation that never satisfies. Third Stoic form: radically accept everything that brought you here. There's a form of suffering that consumes more energy than the actual work of restarting, the perpetual mental war against your past, the endless what-if replaying alternative scenarios, the resentment over decisions you made, the rage over opportunities you lost, the shame over mistakes you committed. Every moment you spend fighting what already happened is a moment you're not investing in building what comes next. And as long as you remain at war with your history, you'll never have peace to create your future. Marcus Aurelius practiced something the Stoics called amor fati, love of fate, not passive resignation or defeatist acceptance. Genuine love, complete embrace of everything that has happened, the beautiful parts and the brutal parts, because all of it brought you exactly to this present moment, where you have opportunity to build something new with wisdom you didn't have before. He wrote, "Do not seek for things to happen the way you want. Rather, wish that they happen as they actually happen, and you will live well. Your life wasn't as you planned. Perfect. Accept that completely and ask, how do I build from here?" The problem with resisting your past is that it's a battle you cannot win. The past already happened. It's an immutable fact. No amount of resentment will change it. But your mental resistance to that immutable past consumes massive energy you could be using to build your mutable present. It's like trying to change yesterday's weather. Completely useless, purely exhausting, and exactly what you do when you live resentful of your history. Epictetus taught his students a specific exercise in radical acceptance. Take the events from your past you most resent, the ones you most wish you could change, and say out loud, "I completely accept that this happened. I wouldn't change it because it made me who I am." At first, those words feel false, forced, but with repetition, something shifts. You begin to see that those events, however painful they were, truly taught you lessons no other experience could have taught. The practical application of amor fati requires a brutal written exercise. List the 5 events or decisions from your past you most resent, that most shame you, that you most wish you could change. For each one, complete this sentence honestly. This taught me. You can't say nothing. Everything teaches something if you're willing to look. That failure taught you humility you didn't have. That betrayal taught you discernment about others' character. That loss taught you what you truly value. Extract the lesson from each pain. Seneca practiced this systematically with what he called the examination of past adversities. He regularly reviewed the difficulties he had faced and asked himself, what strength did I develop thanks to this? What wisdom did I gain? How did it prepare me for future challenges? This practice retrospectively transformed each adversity from enemy to teacher. He didn't deny it was difficult. He simply chose to extract value instead of remaining trapped in resentment. Radical acceptance also includes forgiving past versions of yourself. When you look at decisions you made years ago and think, how could I have been so stupid? You're judging that past version of you. With wisdom, you only have now, thanks to having lived the consequences of those decisions. That past version of you did the best they could with the information, maturity, and capacity they had then. You weren't who you are now. You were who you were then, and that person deserves compassion, not condemnation. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, It is foolish to demand that bad things not happen. That is impossible. But it is sensible to demand that they not harm me when they happen. The bad things already happened. You can't change that. But you can choose whether you allow those past events to continue harming you now through perpetual resentment, or whether you completely accept them and convert them into wisdom that strengthens you. You can practice radical acceptance through a weekly ritual. Every Sunday, dedicate 30 minutes to writing a letter to your past self. Not a letter of judgment. A letter of acceptance and gratitude. I accept the decisions you made. I understand why you made them with the information you had. I'm grateful for the lessons they gave me, even though they were painful. I forgive you completely. This practice gradually dissolves the internal war against your history. Epictetus taught that as long as you keep blaming your past for your present, you surrender all your power. I can't move forward because my past was difficult. I can't trust because I was betrayed. I can't try because I failed before. Each of these statements hands over your capacity to respond to events that have already ended. It makes you a prisoner of a past you cannot change, while ignoring a present you can choose. Seneca observed something profound. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. Resentment about your past is purely imaginary suffering. The events already ended. The original pain already passed. But you keep it alive through constant mental repetition, through insisting that things should have been different. Amor Fati cuts that repetition. It says, they were exactly as they were. They shouldn't have been different because they weren't different. And now, with that past completely accepted, what do I build? Radical acceptance also frees you from the victim narrative. As long as you cling to the story of how you were harmed, how it wasn't your fault, how others are responsible, you remain powerless. Victims have no power because they defined their identity by what others did to them. But when you completely accept your history, including parts where others harmed you, you reclaim power. You no longer need them to change, apologize, or acknowledge what they did. You're no longer trapped waiting for external justice. You're free to build independently of them. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." Your past history is an external cause. You can't change it. But your estimate of it, your interpretation, your assigned meaning, that you control completely. You can see it as evidence that you're a weak victim, or you can see it as training that made you wise. Same history, completely different estimates, completely different results. The daily practice of Amor Fati can be as simple as a morning declaration. Everything that has happened to me, good and bad, brought me exactly here. I completely accept my past. I wouldn't change it because it made me who I am. I'm grateful for lessons learned. Now I build from here. This declaration, genuinely repeated each morning, gradually transforms resentment into acceptance, resistance into peace, internal war into alliance with your own history. Epictetus taught, "Don't demand that events happen as you would wish them. Wish them to happen as they do happen." Your past happened as it happened. You can spend your entire life wishing it had been different. Or you can wish it exactly as it was because that's the only thing that allows peace, not because it was perfect, because it was real. And peace only comes from completely accepting reality, not from fantasizing about alternative realities that never existed nor will exist. Seneca practiced visualizing his life from an external perspective, as if it were someone else's biography. From that perspective, He could see that every mistake was simply a necessary chapter in the complete story, that every waste of time was really a period of essential learning, that every failure was set up for a lesson that couldn't have been learned any other way. You can do the same. Write your past history as if it were someone else's. You'll see patterns and purposes you don't see when you're emotionally trapped inside it. In the end, radical acceptance of everything that brought you here isn't pretending everything was good. It's recognizing that everything was necessary. Every experience, pleasant or painful, was part of the curriculum you needed to be prepared for this present moment. And when you accept that completely, when you make peace with your entire history, when you embrace everything that made you who you are, you free massive energy you were wasting on internal war. That energy is now available for construction, and that's the difference between staying trapped, resenting the past, and building powerfully from the present. Fourth Stoic form: release what's not under your control from day one. There's a mistake that guarantees exhaustion in any restart: trying to control things that aren't under your control. Spending mental energy worrying about whether you'll succeed. Obsessing over whether others will approve. Agonizing over results that depend on 1,000 variables you don't manage. Every moment invested in these worries is a moment stolen from the only work that truly matters. Doing what you do control with total excellence. And what you control is surprisingly small, but infinitely powerful. Epictetus taught the most fundamental distinction of all Stoic philosophy with devastating clarity. There are things that are within our power and things that are not within our power. Within our power are our opinion, our impulse, our desire, our aversion. Not within our power are our body, our possessions, our reputation, our public offices. This distinction isn't abstract philosophy. It's a practical filter that eliminates 90% of unnecessary suffering if you apply it rigorously. The problem when you restart is that your mind naturally obsesses over outcomes. Will this new path work? Will I succeed? What will others think? Will I recover what I lost? All these questions focus on things you don't completely control. You can influence them, but not control them. And every minute spent worrying about them is a minute you're not investing in the only thing you control: your effort, your attitude, your decisions, your present action. Marcus Aurelius practiced a brutal clarity exercise every morning. He mentally divided everything into two absolute categories: things under my control, my thoughts, my interpretations, my actions, my effort, my integrity. Things outside my control, results, others' opinions, external circumstances, the past, the future beyond my next decision. Then he made a conscious decision. Invest 100% of energy in the first category, 0% in the second, not 90 and 10. 100 and 0. The practical application of this form requires a written exercise that sounds simple but is transformative. Take 2 sheets of paper. At the top of the first write, "What I completely control." At the top of the second write, "What I don't control." Now list everything about your restart in the appropriate category. Be brutally honest. You can't control whether you'll succeed. You can control your daily effort. You can't control your family's opinion. You can control whether you act with integrity. You can't control final results. You can control whether you give your best version in the process. When you finish the lists, do something symbolic but powerful. Burn or tear up the second list. Physically destroy it. Those things don't deserve your mental energy because you can't control them. Worrying about them is pure waste. The first list, the one of things under your control, post it where you'll see it every day. That's your only legitimate area of focus. Everything else is distraction that exhausts without producing. Seneca practiced asking himself about every worry, "Is this under my control?" If the answer was no, he consciously let go of the worry. He didn't suppress it. He simply recognized that worry without capacity for action is useless voluntary torture. If the answer was yes, he converted worry into action plan. Productive worry generates action. Worry about the uncontrollable only generates anxiety. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that should be tattooed in the mind of anyone restarting. Reject your sense of injury, and the injury itself disappears. Who is preventing you from rejecting it? The opinion others have of your restart isn't under your control. You can influence it with your actions, but you can't control it. Some people will support you. Others will judge you. Others will tell you you're making a mistake. And none of those opinions change what you must do. Your job is to act with integrity according to your values. Their job is to think what they think. Don't confuse the jobs. The exercise of releasing the uncontrollable also applies to time already spent. You can't control the years you lost. They're gone. They're uncontrollable. You can control what you do with the years that remain. Every moment you spend lamenting past time is a moment you're wasting present time. It's cruel irony, lamenting lost time by losing more time. Epictetus would be brutally direct about this. Stop wasting time lamenting wasted time. Use the time you have. The distinction also protects you from analysis paralysis. When you try to control all factors and foresee all results before acting, you paralyze yourself because it's impossible. There are too many variables outside your control. But when you recognize you only control your next action, you don't need certainty about the entire path. You only need clarity about the next step you control. That's enough to act. Epictetus taught using the example of the archer. The archer completely controls his stance, his technique, his focus, his execution of the shot. He doesn't control if wind changes after releasing the arrow. He doesn't control if the target moves. He doesn't control if the arrow has an invisible defect. If he defines success as hitting the target, he'll frequently be unhappy because that's not completely under his control. If he defines success as executing the shot perfectly according to his current capacity, he can be happy regardless of outcome because he does control that. You can apply this to your restart. Define success by process you control, not by results you don't control. Success isn't earn X amount of money because uncontrollable factors intervene. Success is work with maximum effort and ethical decisions every day because you completely control that. The money may come or not, but if you worked with integrity, you were successful regardless. Seneca observed, "We suffer not so much from what happens, but from our opinion about what happens." Applied to control. You don't suffer so much from circumstances you don't control, but from your insistence on trying to control them. When you release that insistence, when you accept there are limits to your control and focus only within those limits, the suffering of fighting against reality disappears. Marcus Aurelius also practiced releasing control over his own body. As an aging emperor, he could have spent enormous energy resisting inevitable physical deterioration. Instead, he wrote, "Your body is not yours to keep eternally. Use what you have now with virtue." He controlled how he responded to those realities with courage and dignity. The daily practice of releasing the uncontrollable can be simple. Every time you notice anxiety or worry, pause and ask, "Is this under my control?" If not, breathe deeply and say, I release what I don't control. I focus on what I do control. Then, specifically identify what action within your control you can take. Don't stay in abstract worry. Move to concrete action in the controllable area. Epictetus summarized all this in a simple but revolutionary teaching. Don't seek for events to happen as you wish. Seek for your will to be in harmony with events as they happen. Your will, your decisions, your actions, you control those. Events, results, circumstances, you don't control those. Harmonize what you control with the reality of what you don't control. That harmony is peace. The disharmony of trying to control the uncontrollable is perpetual suffering. In the end, releasing what you don't control from the first day of your restart isn't giving up or lowering standards. It's concentrating all your limited energy where it truly makes a difference. It's eliminating the waste of useless worry to maximize investment in productive action. It's recognizing that your power is limited, but within those limits, it's absolute. And when you live completely within your circle of control, when you stop wasting energy trying to expand that circle to things that will never be under your control, you discover that the circle you control is enough. It's exactly enough to build an extraordinary life if you use it with total mastery. Fifth Stoic form: act as if you already were the person you need to be. There's a trap that keeps people stuck indefinitely in preparation without execution. The belief that they must wait until they feel ready before acting like the person they want to be. They wait to feel brave before acting bravely. They wait to feel disciplined before acting with discipline. They wait to feel confident before acting with confidence. But the Stoics understood something radical that completely inverts that sequence. You don't act bravely because you feel brave. You feel brave because you act bravely. Character doesn't precede action. Character is forged through action. Marcus Aurelius didn't wait to feel like a perfect emperor before making difficult emperor decisions. He acted as a virtuous emperor from day one, even when internally he felt insecure, overwhelmed, inadequate. He wrote, "Rise in the morning and say to yourself, I am going to meet meddling, ungrateful, arrogant people, but I cannot be harmed by them because they cannot force me to act in a degrading way." He didn't wait to feel invulnerable. He acted from dignity, even though he felt vulnerability. And through that repeated action, he became the character he initially only performed. The problem with waiting to be ready is you never feel completely ready. There's always more to learn, more preparation to do, more time to gain. That waiting is procrastination disguised as prudence. It's fear disguised as preparation. And while you wait for the moment when you'll finally feel prepared, that moment never comes, because real preparation only comes from doing the thing you're avoiding until you feel ready to do it. Epictetus taught his students something that directly confronted this trap. If you want to be a writer, write. If you want to be a philosopher, philosophize. If you want to be a disciplined person, act with discipline now. Not study about discipline until you feel disciplined. Act with discipline repeatedly until discipline becomes your nature. Being follows doing, not the other way around. You become what you do repeatedly, not what you plan to be eventually. The practical application of this form requires specifically identifying what kind of person you need to be for this restart to work. Not vague generalities like successful or better. Specific character traits. Perhaps you need to be disciplined, brave, patient, focused, resilient. Choose the 3 most critical characteristics. Then ask yourself for each one, how would someone with this characteristic specifically act today? and act exactly like that today, without waiting to feel it first. Seneca practiced this through what he called rehearsals of virtue. If he wanted to develop courage, he deliberately placed himself in situations requiring courage, and acted bravely, even though he felt fear. If he wanted to develop temperance, he practiced moderation, even though he desired excess. He didn't wait for the desire for excess to disappear before acting with moderation. He acted with moderation repeatedly until moderation became more natural than excess. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." The discussion, the planning, the preparation, all of that is procrastination if it never becomes action. In your restart, don't spend weeks perfectly defining who you should be. Define it well enough in an hour. Then start acting as that person today. Adjust along the way based on real experience, not perfect theory never tested. The key is that you act as if, even though you don't genuinely feel it yet. As if you were already disciplined, even though you feel lazy. As if you were already brave, even though you feel fear. As if you were already confident, even though you feel insecurity. That initial performance feels false, forced. But with repetition, something extraordinary happens. The performance becomes nature. What began as external performance eventually integrates as internal identity. Epictetus used the actor metaphor we already mentioned, but applied specifically to this principle. When you're assigned a role in a play, you don't wait to feel like the character before performing. You act as the character repeatedly until you can do it convincingly. Similarly, when you decide to be a certain type of person, you don't wait to feel like that person. You act as that person consistently until your performance becomes your being. You can implement this through a specific morning practice. Every morning, before starting your day, ask yourself, how would the version of me who already has the character I need act? If you need discipline, that version would get up immediately without negotiating. If you need courage, that version would take action you fear without postponing. If you need focus, that version would eliminate distractions without drama. Then act exactly like that today, not tomorrow when you feel more ready. Today, Seneca observed, it is the power of the mind to be unconquerable. That power doesn't come from waiting until circumstances are perfect or until you feel perfectly prepared. It comes from deciding to act with virtue now, regardless of circumstances or feelings. Every time you act as the person you decided to be, even though you don't feel it yet, you exercise that mental power. And with each repetition, that power strengthens. Marcus Aurelius also recognized there would be a gap between performance and feeling at the beginning. He wrote, "The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. At first, your feeling of not being ready is an obstacle. But if you act despite that feeling, your mind gradually adapts. The feeling eventually follows the repeated action. The gap closes not because you waited to feel different, but because you acted different until the feeling caught up with the action." The practice of acting as if also protects you against paralyzing perfectionism. The perfectionist waits to be able to execute perfectly before beginning. The Stoic begins imperfectly and improves through iteration. You don't wait to be perfectly disciplined before acting with discipline. You act with imperfect discipline today. Tomorrow, slightly better. The day after, a bit more. Perfection, if it exists, comes at the end of thousands of imperfect actions, not at the beginning as a prerequisite to start. Epictetus taught, "First say to yourself what kind of person you want to be. Then do what you must do. But crucial, do what you must do now, not after more preparation. If you decided to be a disciplined person, do now the disciplined thing you're avoiding. If you decided to be a brave person, make now the decision requiring courage. If you decided to be a focused person, eliminate now the distraction fragmenting your attention. Seneca practiced specific visualization every morning. He imagined himself acting during the day as the virtuous person he aspired to be. But crucial, he didn't stay in visualization. He used that visualization as mental rehearsal that he then executed through real action. Visualization without action is fantasy. Visualization followed by action is effective preparation. In the end, acting as if you already were the person you need to be isn't false pretense. It's a proven method of character transformation. You're not pretending to be someone you're not. You're practicing being who you decided to become until the practice becomes nature. Each action aligned with that character is a vote for that identity. With enough votes accumulated through repeated actions, that identity becomes your reality. Not because you waited to feel it first, because you performed it consistently until being followed doing. Sixth Stoic form. Visualize the worst-case scenario and prepare for it. There's a fear that paralyzes more than any real danger. The fear of the unknown, of what could happen if this restart fails. That fear lives in the shadows of your mind, magnifying precisely because you never examine it directly. You never ask yourself with brutal specificity, what exactly is the worst that could happen, and could I actually handle it if it did? The Stoics discovered something counterintuitive, that the way to conquer that fear isn't to avoid thinking about the worst-case scenario, but to deliberately visualize it, explore it completely, and discover that even that is survivable. Seneca practiced what he called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of future evils. Before any important undertaking, he dedicated specific time to visualizing everything that could go wrong, not as an exercise in pessimism, but as strategic training. He asked himself, what if I lose all my money? If I lose my position? If I'm exiled again? If my plans fail completely? And for each scenario, he developed a specific plan. How would I respond? What internal resources would I use? Could I maintain my virtue, even in that worst case? The problem with avoiding thinking about the worst-case scenario is that your mind does it anyway, but in a vague and amplified way. You have a general sense of dread without clarity about what exactly you fear. That vagueness is what gives fear its paralyzing power. But when you pull it out of the shadows, when you examine it with brutal specificity, when you name it exactly, it dramatically loses its power because you discover that the worst case, while unpleasant, is manageable. Marcus Aurelius practiced this every morning as part of his mental preparation for the day. He visualized specifically the difficulties he would face. Today I will meet people who will betray me, who will disappoint me, who will attack me. Not to depress himself, but to not be taken by surprise. When those difficulties inevitably arrived, he didn't react with shock because he had already mentally rehearsed that possibility. He could respond from his best version instead of reacting from bewilderment. The practical application of this form requires a specific worst-case scenario visualization session for your restart. Take paper and write honestly. If this restart fails completely, what would specifically happen? Not vague generalities like, it would be terrible. Concrete details. You would lose X amount of money. You would have to make Y adjustment in lifestyle. Z people would judge you. You would face a specific consequence. Write each element of the worst-case scenario with maximum possible detail. Epictetus taught that most of our fears are about losing external things we believe necessary for happiness, but that are actually indifferent to our essential well-being. You're afraid of losing money, but have you lived before with less money? You survived. You're afraid of social judgment, but does your value as a person genuinely depend on others' opinion? No. You're afraid of visible failure, but does that failure define your character or just a specific outcome? Just outcome. Once you've written the worst-case scenario with brutal detail, ask yourself for each element. Is this truly insurmountable? Have I faced comparable things before? Do I know people who have survived this, or worse? What internal resources do I have to handle it? Almost always you'll discover that the worst case, while undesirable, isn't the end of the world. It's simply difficult. And difficult is different from impossible. Seneca wrote something devastatingly honest. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. When you avoid examining your fear, your imagination magnifies it infinitely. When you examine it with specificity, it reduces to real size. It's still a challenge, but it's no longer an invincible monster. It's a concrete problem with potential solutions. And that transformation from imaginary monster to concrete problem eliminates fear's paralyzing power. Worst-case scenario visualization also includes developing a specific contingency plan, not just what could go wrong, but what would I specifically do if it goes wrong? If I lose invested money, my plan B is X. If this path doesn't work, my alternative is Y. If I face severe social judgment, my response will be Z. Having a contingency plan isn't pessimism. It's preparation that allows you to act with appropriate courage because you know that even in the worst case you have options. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." Applied to worst-case scenario, your fear of what could happen is just a mental projection, not inevitable reality. It may happen or not. And if it happens, your real experience will be different from your projection because you'll have resources and options you're not considering now. Preparation helps you, but anticipatory fear is always worse than faced reality. Epictetus used a specific exercise with students who feared losing something valuable. He asked them to imagine they had already lost it. Live a complete day as if you had already lost that thing. What would your life be like? What would you do? How would you feel? This exercise reveals you could function, perhaps not optimally, but you would function. And that revelation eliminates the terror of loss because you've rehearsed living without it and discovered it's survivable. You can do this with your restart. Dedicate a day to living as if your restart had already failed. What would you do then? How would you spend the day? What options would you have? This mental rehearsal shows you there's life after failure. That failure isn't death. It's simply redirection requiring adjustment. And when you viscerally know you can survive the worst case, fear loses its capacity to paralyze you. Seneca specifically practiced poverty rehearsals. Despite his immense wealth, he regularly spent days living as if he were poor. Minimal food, simple clothing, no comforts. Not to romanticize poverty, but to demonstrate to his nervous system, I can be fine even with absolute minimum. My well-being doesn't depend on external luxuries. That practical demonstration eliminated fear of material loss because he had empirically proven he could function without it. Worst-case scenario, visualization also reveals something crucial about the nature of your fears, that many are about ego and social status, not about real survival. You're afraid of looking like a failure more than the real material consequences of failure. You're afraid of what others will say more than the practical impact on your life. When you see this clearly, when you recognize that much of your fear is about external image, you can ask yourself, am I really going to let fear of others' opinion prevent me from trying something important? Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." The worst-case scenario you fear is a potential external cause. Your anguish about it doesn't come from its reality, because it's not yet real. It comes from your estimate of how devastating it would be. And that estimate, when you examine it honestly through detailed visualization, usually reveals you've dramatically overestimated the danger. Epictetus taught, "It is not death that a man should fear, but that he should never begin to live." Applied to restart. It's not the failure of the restart you should fear, but that you never try it for fear of failure. Better to try and fail than to never try for paralyzing fear of possibility of failure, because not trying is guaranteed failure. Trying is possible failure, but also possible success. The math is obvious when you look at it honestly. Weekly practice of premeditatio malorum can be simple. Every Sunday, dedicate 30 minutes to specifically visualizing what could go wrong the next week in your restart. Not to anguish, but to prepare. What obstacles could you face? What temptations to give up could appear? What doubts could arise? For each, develop a prepared response. When this happens, I'll do this. That mental preparation means when it actually happens, it doesn't paralyze you. Seneca observed, "Calamity is virtue's opportunity." But you can only seize that opportunity if you've prepared your mind beforehand. If calamity takes you completely unprepared, you'll probably react poorly. But if you visualize that possibility, if you mentally rehearsed how you would respond with virtue even in that scenario, you can convert calamity into demonstration of character instead of collapse of composure. In the end, visualizing the worst-case scenario and preparing for it isn't pessimism that sabotages your success. It's realism that frees you to act with appropriate courage. It's honestly recognizing that bad things can happen and mentally preparing to handle them with dignity if they do. It's transforming vague, paralyzing fear into specific clarity about real risks and how you would handle them. And that transformation eliminates the power fear has over you, freeing you to act decisively instead of being paralyzed by imaginary terrors that probably will never materialize in the way you imagine them. Seventh, Stoic form. Reduce before you build. There's a mistake that guarantees failure in any restart. Trying to build the new on top of the toxic without first clearing the ground. You add new habits while maintaining relationships that sabotage those habits. You start new projects while keeping commitments that drain your energy. You try to be a new version of yourself while allowing people to treat you like your old version. The Stoics understood something that add more culture ignores, that before building effectively, you must ruthlessly eliminate everything that contaminates the ground. Marcus Aurelius practiced something radical for an emperor with unlimited access: deliberate reduction. Instead of accumulating more possessions, more pleasures, more commitments, he constantly asked, "Is this necessary? Does this serve my purpose? Or is it just noise that distracts?" and he eliminated without sentimentality everything that didn't pass that filter. He wrote, "Ask constantly, is this necessary? Most of what you say and do is not essential. If you can eliminate it, you'll have more time and more tranquility." The problem when you restart is that the temptation is to immediately add new routines, new goals, new projects, new connections. But if you add all that without first eliminating the toxic you already have, you simply create overload that collapses under its own weight. It's like trying to plant a garden without first removing the weeds. The new plants can't grow because the weeds choke them. First you eliminate weeds, then you plant. Epictetus taught his students a brutal inventory exercise. List everything in your life. All your relationships, all your commitments, all your possessions, all your habits, all your entertainment, everything. Then for each item, ask honestly, does this bring me closer to who I want to be or push me away? Does this serve my purpose or sabotage it? Does this strengthen me or weaken me? And ruthlessly eliminate everything that doesn't pass that test. Not because you're cruel, but because you're serious about real transformation. The practical application of reduction requires starting with 3 specific categories: toxic people, useless commitments, destructive habits. In people, identify relationships that consistently push you toward behaviors you want to eliminate. You don't have to hate them. Simply recognize that while you maintain closeness with them, your transformation is almost impossible. Reduce contact dramatically or eliminate it completely if necessary. Your primary loyalty is to your transformation, not to maintaining relationships that sabotage it. Seneca practiced this with a brutality that surprises many. When he identified that certain people or activities were toxic to his development, he cut them completely without hesitation, not gradually, not trying to make them work. He simply eliminated them and redirected that energy to the constructive. He wrote, "Associating with many is dangerous. Each one of them will bring some vice." He wasn't a misanthrope. He was strategically selective because he understood your social environment largely determines who you become. In commitments, identify obligations that consume your time without serving your genuine purpose. Commitments you accepted out of guilt, social pressure, inertia, not knowing how to say no. Each of those commitments is energy you could be investing in your restart. Most people restart without eliminating any old commitment, so they simply add the work of the restart on top of an already unsustainable load. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "It is essential to get rid of all the unnecessary things we do, say, or think, so we have room for what's important." Note, he includes thought. You don't just eliminate external activities, you eliminate unnecessary mental patterns, worry about others' opinion, rumination about immutable past, fantasy about futures that will never come. Each of those patterns consumes mental energy you need for your restart. In destructive habits, identify behaviors you repeat automatically, even though you know they harm you. Compulsive scrolling, consuming trash content, procrastination with entertainment, constant complaining, habitual victimization. Each is a habit that must be cut before new constructive habits can establish themselves. You can't sustain new discipline while maintaining old indiscipline in other areas. Everything is connected. Epictetus taught a specific exercise. Spend a complete day doing radical inventory. Every activity you do, ask yourself, why am I doing this? Is it necessary? Does it serve my purpose? If the answer is no, add it to the elimination list. At the end of the day, you'll have a brutal list of everything that must go. Don't negotiate. Don't rationalize. If you identified it must go, it must go. Immediate elimination is easier than gradual because you don't give time for internal resistance to organize. Seneca observed, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more. That is poor." Applied to reduction. You're not freer by having more options, relationships, commitments. You're freer by eliminating everything except the essential. Each thing you eliminate is one less weight you carry, one less decision you must make, one less distraction that fragments your focus. Genuine wealth is having exactly what's necessary, nothing more nor less. Reduction also applies to physical environment. Marcus Aurelius, with access to palaces full of luxuries, chose to live with deliberate simplicity. Not because he couldn't have more, but because he understood that every unnecessary possession is a potential distraction, potential attachment, potential worry. When you restart, eliminate possessions that don't serve your new direction. Each object you eliminate is mental space freed. You can implement reduction through an elimination week before beginning active construction of your restart. Week 1. Focused exclusively on eliminating. Day 1. Toxic relationships. Day 2. Useless commitments. Day 3. Destructive habits. Day 4. Unnecessary possessions. Day 5. Draining entertainment. Day 6. Negative mental patterns. Day 7. Review of everything eliminated. Only after that radical cleaning do you begin to build. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Discard everything that is useless and without purpose in thought and action." The reason this elimination is so powerful is that it creates space, mental space, temporal space, emotional space. And in that space, the new thing you're trying to build can grow without constant competition from the old thing you're trying to eliminate. You can't fill a cup that's already full. You must empty it first. Epictetus warned against a common trap, eliminating the obvious but keeping the subtle. You eliminate clearly toxic friendships, but keep the moderately toxic ones. You eliminate obviously destructive habits, but keep the subtly weakening ones. Everything that doesn't actively strengthen you passively weakens you. There's no neutral. So the standard isn't, is this obviously harmful? But does this strengthen me or weaken me even slightly? If it weakens, even slightly, it must go. Seneca practiced quarterly review of his life, where he reapplied this elimination process. Not once at restart, but regularly, because new things constantly try to fill your life. Obligations accumulate. New relationships form. Habits slip back. Reduction isn't a one-time event. It's continuous practice of keeping your life clean of contaminants that constantly try to enter. In the end, reducing before building isn't negativity that focuses on eliminating instead of creating. It's wisdom that recognizes effective construction requires clean ground. It's understanding that your energy is limited, and each thing you keep that doesn't serve you is energy stolen from things that do serve you. It's acceptance that real transformation requires not just adding the new, but eliminating the old that sabotages the new. And that elimination, though uncomfortable at first, is a gift you give yourself. The gift of clean space where you can finally build something solid without contamination from toxins that sabotaged every previous attempt. 8th Stoic form. Live each day as if it were your last with this purpose. There's a dangerous illusion that destroys more restarts than any external obstacle. The illusion of unlimited time. The belief that there will always be tomorrow to start seriously. There will always be next week to truly commit. There will always be next month to give your best effort. That illusion allows you to indefinitely postpone what you know you must do today. It allows you to tolerate mediocrity because eventually you'll try harder. And while you operate under that illusion, days become weeks, weeks become months, and suddenly you look back and discover you wasted another year on promises you never kept. Marcus Aurelius practiced memento mori, constant reminder of death, not as a morbid exercise, but as a tool of brutal clarity. He asked himself every morning, if I knew today was my last day, would I continue postponing this? Would I continue tolerating mediocrity in my effort? Would I continue wasting time on things that don't matter? And the obvious answer drove him to action that the illusion of infinite time never generated. He wrote, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think." The specific problem with restarts is you tell yourself, I have time. This is a new beginning. I can start slow, build momentum gradually, intensify later. But that later never comes, because there's always another later beyond it. The urgency you need to fully commit only comes when you recognize time is finite and you've already spent enough. That each day you postpone giving everything is a day you'll never recover. Epictetus taught his students a devastating question. If you knew you had only 6 months left to live, would you continue postponing this change you say you want to make? The obvious answer exposes the lie you've been telling yourself, that you have all the time in the world. You don't. No one does. And when you live as if you did, you waste the real time you do have in endless preparation that never becomes serious execution. The practical application of memento mori in your restart requires a specific morning exercise. Every morning, before starting your day, close your eyes and briefly visualize your death. Not eventually. Soon. Maybe today. Maybe this week. Then ask yourself, if this were my last day with opportunity to work on this restart, how would I live it? Would I continue postponing the difficult decision? Would I continue tolerating distractions? Would I continue giving myself excuses for mediocrity? And act exactly as you would answer if it really were your last day. Seneca practiced this so rigorously that he wrote, "Live as if each day were your entire life." It doesn't mean living recklessly without planning for the future. It means giving each day the total importance it deserves, instead of treating it as rehearsal for some future day when you'll finally do it right. Today isn't practice. Today is real life happening. And if you don't live it completely, you've lost it forever. Marcus Aurelius also used a specific variation for restarts. If you knew you only have 1 year to achieve this goal before the opportunity disappears forever, would you continue at this pace? Or would you dramatically intensify your effort? That question exposes how much of your current effort is really comfortable mediocrity disguised as progress. When time is genuinely limited, real effort emerges. But don't wait for the limitation to be externally imposed. Consciously impose it through memento mori. The urgency that memento mori generates isn't frantic panic, it's focused clarity. It's elimination of everything superfluous because you recognize you don't have time for the superfluous. It's total commitment to the essential because each lost day is an opportunity that never returns. Epictetus expressed it perfectly. How much longer will you postpone demanding the best from yourself? You can implement this through a complementary evening practice. Every night, before sleeping, ask yourself, if I had died today, would I have been satisfied with how I lived this day of my restart? Did I do everything I could do? Or did I allow myself to slide into mediocrity, assuming I'll make up for it tomorrow? This honest reflection, repeated each night, keeps the standard high because it constantly confronts you with the reality that tomorrow isn't guaranteed. Seneca observed something brutal. It is not that we have little time. It is that we waste much of it. When you live under the illusion of unlimited time, you waste massive time on things you would never do if you recognized its finitude. Conversations that drain energy, entertainment you don't really enjoy, procrastination disguised as planning. Memento mori cuts all that because when you know time is limited, every minute becomes precious. Marcus Aurelius specifically practiced applying memento mori to projects. If I knew I only have 3 months to complete this, what would I eliminate as unnecessary? What would I prioritize as essential? What intensity of effort would I apply? Then he acted exactly like that, not in 3 months, but now. That mental simulation of temporal limitation generates clarity about priorities that temporal abundance never provides. The practice of memento mori also eliminates perfectionist procrastination. When you have all the time in the world, you can wait until the plan is perfect. When you recognize time is limited, you act with a good enough plan and adjust on the go. Perfectionism is the luxury of those who believe time is infinite. Decisive action with rapid iteration is the necessity of those who recognize time is finite. Epictetus taught, if you wanted to be an Olympian, you would start today, not after more preparation. Applied to your restart. If you really want to transform, you begin with maximum intensity today, not gradually after more preparation. Endless preparation is procrastination disguised. Memento mori forces you to recognize you're sufficiently prepared now, or you'll never be prepared, because more preparation without action is simply more procrastination. Seneca wrote something that should be engraved in the mind of anyone restarting. While we postpone life, life passes. Your restart isn't something that begins eventually after adequate preparation. Your restart is now or never. Each day you wait for the perfect moment is a day where opportunity slightly evaporates. Memento mori eliminates the fantasy of the perfect future moment and forces you to act with the imperfect present moment. Marcus Aurelius also recognized that memento mori must be balance, not paralysis from death anxiety, but appropriate urgency from life's limitation. He wrote, "Don't act as if you were going to live 10,000 years, but also not as if you were going to die tomorrow to the point of planning nothing." It's balance between urgency that eliminates procrastination and vision that allows sustainable construction. You live each day completely but build for a duration you don't know. In the end, living each day as if it were your last with this purpose isn't dramatics that generate unsustainable stress. It's realism that generates clarity about what truly matters and appropriate urgency to act accordingly. It's eliminating the comfortable illusion of infinite time that allows you to postpone indefinitely. It's recognizing that time is your most limited resource, and each day you don't use it completely is a day lost forever. And when you live from that clarity, when each day matters because you recognize it's one of a finite quantity, your restart stops being an eventual project. You'll start seriously someday and becomes a present commitment. You execute with total intensity today. 9th Stoic form, train your mind for the resistance that's coming. There's a brutal reality about any restart that most people ignore until it's too late. It won't be easy. There will be days when the initial motivation has completely evaporated. There will be moments when every fiber of your being wants to return to the familiar, even though the familiar was exactly what kept you trapped. There will be temptations to give up that will seem completely rational in the moment. And if you reach those moments without specific mental preparation, if you depend on spontaneous motivation or willpower in the moment, you'll fail. Resistance isn't built when you need it. It's built before you need it. Marcus Aurelius understood this profoundly. He didn't wait to face difficulty to decide how he would respond. He prepared mentally every morning by specifically visualizing the difficulties he would face. Today I will be betrayed by people I trust. Today plans I carefully designed will fail. Today I will be tempted to act against my principles. Not to depress himself, but so that when those difficulties inevitably arrived, they wouldn't take him by surprise. He had already mentally rehearsed the response. He had already decided how he would act. The real difficulty simply activated the prepared plan instead of generating chaotic reaction. The problem with relying on motivation of the moment is that motivation is a fluctuating emotion. Some days you feel it. Many days you don't. If your capacity to act depends on feeling motivated, you'll act inconsistently. And inconsistency kills restarts more effectively than dramatic failure. Dramatic failure is decisive. Inconsistency is slow erosion that leaves you in perpetual limbo without clearly advancing or retreating, simply wasting time in ambivalence. Epictetus taught his students a specific mental preparation exercise. Before undertaking any action, ask yourself, what will tempt me to give up? Then, with those difficulties clearly identified, write exactly how you will respond when they appear. This writing is crucial. When you write your prepared response, you create external memory. You can review when your internal memory is clouded by emotion. The practical application of this form requires a specific preparation session before beginning serious execution of your restart. Take paper and honestly complete these sentences. In week 3, when the novelty has disappeared, I will feel. When I face the first significant obstacle, my temptation will be. When people question my decision to restart, my automatic reaction will be. For each completion, write below. When this happens, instead of my automatic reaction, I will specifically do this. Seneca practiced what he called rehearsal of adversity. Before any important undertaking, he dedicated time to vividly imagine all the ways he could fail, all the difficulties he could face, all the temptations that could defeat him. Then, for each scenario, he developed a specific response that would keep his virtue intact. He couldn't control whether those adversities would arrive. He could completely control whether he was mentally prepared to respond well when they did. Marcus Aurelius also wrote specific reminders for his future weakened self. He knew there would be moments when he would feel tempted to compromise his principles for convenience, so he wrote directly to that future self. When you feel tempted to act against virtue for temporary gain, remember, that pleasure will pass, but the shame of betraying your principles will remain. Those words written in a moment of clarity could be read in a moment of weakness. You can do the same. Write a specific letter to your future self who will be tempted to give up. When you feel it's too difficult and want to return to the familiar, remember why you started this restart. Remember the pain of staying trapped in what you left. Remember this moment of temptation is temporary, but giving up would be permanent. Don't surrender what you want most for what you want now. Keep that letter where you can easily access it when you need it. Epictetus taught something crucial about mental preparation. When you are about to undertake any action, remember what kind of action it is. Applied to your restart. When you're in a moment of temptation to give up, remember what kind of decision it is. It's a decision between maintaining integrity or betraying it, between continuing to grow or returning to stagnation, between honoring commitment to yourself or breaking it. When you see the decision clearly, without rationalizations, the right choice is obvious. Seneca also practiced identifying his own specific weaknesses so he could prepare against them. He knew he tended to rationalize compromises when he was tired. He knew he tended to seek comfort in easy pleasures when stressed. He knew he tended to question his decisions when facing social criticism. So he prepared specific responses for exactly those moments of known weakness. You must do the same. Identify your specific surrender patterns based on past experience. When specifically have you abandoned previous commitments? What triggers caused those surrenders? What rationalizations did you use? Write them all down. Then, for each one, prepare a specific counter-response. When I feel tired and want to skip my commitment, instead of rationalizing, I'll remember that discipline is built specifically in uncomfortable moments, not in easy moments. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The mind adapts and converts to its own purposes the obstacle to our acting. But that adaptation isn't automatic. It requires specific training. It requires having decided beforehand that obstacles are opportunities. If you reach the obstacle without that mental preparation, your automatic reaction will be frustration and potential surrender. If you reach the obstacle with mental preparation, your trained response is to see opportunity to strengthen exactly what you're trying to develop. Mental preparation also includes establishing a structural support system that doesn't depend on motivation. Don't trust that you'll feel motivated to maintain commitment. Create structure that keeps you on track even when motivation disappears. External accountability, automated reminders, pre-committed consequences for surrender, programmed rewards for consistency. All of this prepared before the battle begins. Epictetus warned, "It is impossible to begin to learn what you think you already know." Applied to resistance. If you think you'll automatically have mental strength when you need it, you won't prepare that strength beforehand. And then, when you need it, you'll discover you don't have it. Mental strength, like physical strength, must be trained before the test. It doesn't appear magically when you need it, if you never trained it. Seneca practiced a weekly exercise of voluntary resistance. He deliberately placed himself in uncomfortable situations requiring resistance, even though it wasn't externally necessary. Fasting when he didn't have to fast, exhausting exercise when he could have rested, intense work when he could have procrastinated, all to train his mind in sustaining uncomfortable effort. When the moment came where he really needed that resistance, he had already practiced it hundreds of times. You can implement this every week during your restart. In addition to the necessary work of your project, add resistance training. Something deliberately uncomfortable, you don't have to do but choose to do, to train your mind. Cold shower, fasting, extra exercise, additional work, anything that's voluntarily uncomfortable. You're training the mental muscle of doing difficult things when you don't feel like it. That muscle will be your salvation in critical moments. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, "You can endure anything if your mind is willing. But mental willingness isn't a decision of the moment. It's preparation of months. It's having specifically trained your mind to sustain discomfort. It's having practiced prepared responses to specific temptations. It's having established external structure that holds you when internal motivation fails. All of that built before needing it. In the end, training your mind for the resistance that's coming isn't pessimism that assumes failure. It's realism that recognizes difficulty is inevitable in any real transformation, and preparation is the difference between collapsing before that difficulty or sustaining it until getting through. It's recognition that the battle for your restart will be won or lost, not in moments of motivated clarity, but in moments of tempted confusion. And you only win those moments if you anticipated them, if you prepared specifically for them, if you decided beforehand who you'll be when they arrive. Without that preparation, you're vulnerable. With that preparation, you're unshakable. 10th Stoic form: review your progress each night with brutal honesty. There's a practice that absolutely separates those who transform their lives from those who simply talk about transforming them. Honest, nightly reflection. Not occasional reflection when you feel philosophical. Not vague analysis when something goes obviously wrong. Systematic, brutal, excuse-free examination of each day before it ends. Seneca considered this practice so essential that he wrote, "When the light is put out and my wife has fallen silent, I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done, and said, I hide nothing from myself, I pass nothing by." The problem with living without nightly reflection is that days blend into an indistinguishable blur. You have no clarity about whether you're progressing or stagnating because you never examine with specificity what you did well and what you did poorly. You tell yourself a vague story that you're working on it without concrete evidence of progress. And that lack of clarity allows you to slide into mediocrity without admitting it, because you never force yourself to honestly look at what you actually did versus what you promised to do. Marcus Aurelius practiced nightly reflection with 3 specific questions that Seneca had perfected. What did I do wrong today? What did I do well today? What could I have done better? They weren't rhetorical questions. He answered them honestly in writing each night, and that written record became data that revealed patterns he would never have seen without systematic documentation. He saw where he repeatedly failed. He saw where he gradually improved. He saw exactly where he needed to focus additional effort. The practical application of this form requires establishing a non-negotiable ritual. 15 minutes every night, without exception, dedicated exclusively to honest reflection on your day in the context of your restart. No scrolling, no entertainment, no collapsing into sleep. 15 minutes of brutal examination. And, crucial, it must be written. Thinking vaguely about your day doesn't count. Writing specifically about your day generates clarity and accountability that vague thinking never produces. Epictetus taught that this examination should be honest, but not punitive. The goal isn't to punish yourself for failures, but to identify them clearly so you can correct them. If you discover you gave in to distraction when you promised to focus, you don't flagellate yourself with guilt. You simply observe. Today, at 3 p.m., I gave in to social media distraction for 45 minutes. Tomorrow, I'll specifically put my phone in another room during work blocks. Clear observation plus specific action plan. Guilt without a plan is useless emotional indulgence. Seneca used a specific format you can adopt. Divide your reflection into 3 sections. First, where I acted according to my values today. Specifically list moments where you maintained integrity, where you executed commitments, where you resisted temptation. This section isn't self-congratulation but recognition of evidence of progress. Second, where I compromised my values today. Specifically, list moments where you gave in, where you rationalized, where you chose easy over right. Third, specific plan for tomorrow, not generalities, concrete actions based on today's lessons. Marcus Aurelius also used nightly reflection to identify patterns requiring systemic attention. If he noticed he repeatedly failed at the same time of day, he knew he needed specific structure for that hour. If he noticed a certain type of situation consistently tempted him, he knew he needed specific mental preparation for that situation. Patterns only become visible with consistent documentation. Without written nightly reflection, they remain invisible. You can implement this by buying a specific journal just for nightly reflection on your restart. Date each entry. Answer Seneca's 3 questions each night. After 30 days, you'll reread from the beginning and see patterns that are completely invisible day to day. You'll see real progress in areas where you practiced consistent correction. You'll see frustrating repetition in areas where you didn't take corrective action. Both types of information are invaluable. Epictetus warned against self-deception during reflection. It's tempting to write what sounds good instead of what actually happened. It's tempting to justify failures instead of acknowledging them. It's tempting to exaggerate successes and minimize failures. But all of that destroys the value of the practice. Nightly reflection only works if it's brutally honest. If you can't be honest with yourself in private, where can you be? Seneca observed, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more, that is poor." Applied to reflection, it's not the person who occasionally fails who's in danger, but the person who fails without recognizing it, who desires progress without doing the honest observation work that progress requires. Nightly reflection is that work. It's precision engineering applied to your character. It's scientific form of self-improvement instead of vague hope that you'll eventually get better. Marcus Aurelius also used nightly reflection to practice specific gratitude. After examining successes and failures, he listed 3 specific things he was grateful for that day. Not generalities like health, but specifics like 20-minute conversation with Marcus, where he gave me perspective I didn't have. This practice balanced honesty about areas for improvement with appreciation for the good that already existed. It prevented critical examination from becoming toxic negativity. Nightly reflection also protects you against the illusion of progress. It's easy to feel you're progressing when you're really just busy without advancing. But when you specifically document each day, you can't fool yourself. If you promised to work 3 deep hours and only worked 40 fragmented minutes, it's written. If you promised to eliminate distraction and gave in 4 times, it's documented. Numbers don't lie. Your memory can. Your documentation doesn't. Epictetus taught. It is the power of the mind to be unconquerable. But that power is cultivated through specific practice of honest examination. Each night you examine your day without excuses. You strengthen the capacity to observe your patterns without completely identifying with them. You develop metacognition, the ability to think about your thinking, observe your behaviors, see your mental traps. That capacity is essential for breaking destructive patterns. Seneca practiced something additional. Every week, in addition to daily nightly reflection, he did deeper weekly reflection. He reread his 7 nightly entries. He identified the most significant pattern of the week. He developed a specific intervention for the following week targeting that pattern. This weekly reflection added an additional layer of intentionality that daily reflection alone doesn't provide. You can adopt this. Every Sunday, in addition to your regular nightly reflection, add 30 minutes of weekly reflection. Reread your 7 entries. Ask yourself, what pattern is most urgent to address? What did I consistently do well that I can amplify? What did I promise to change but didn't change? What specific intervention will I implement this week? This additional level of reflection dramatically accelerates progress. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Those who do not observe the movements of their own minds will necessarily be unhappy." Nightly reflection is that observatory. It's systematic practice of observing movements of your mind, patterns of your behavior, alignment between your values and your actions. Without it, you live on autopilot without really knowing what you're doing. With it, you live with awareness that allows continuous correction. In the end, nightly reflection with brutal honesty is perhaps the most directly transformative Stoic practice, because it ensures that each day teaches you something, that each mistake becomes a lesson, that you're never simply repeating yesterday without learning from it. It's the difference between living 1 year of experience and living one day 365 times. It's the difference between a restart that truly transforms because you constantly correct course based on honest feedback, and a restart that fails because you never honestly admit where you're failing until it's too late to correct. The restart is revelation. When you understand it was never about starting but about continuing. You've reached the end of this journey through 10 Stoic forms of restarting, not from zero but from wisdom. But if you believe the end of these words means the end of the work, you've completely missed the point. These forms aren't information to consume and mentally archive. They're practices to implement daily for months and years. They're tools that only work when you use them, not when you know them. They're seeds that only grow when you plant them in fertile soil of consistent action, not when you keep them in a pretty package of intellectual understanding. Marcus Aurelius never stopped practicing nightly reflection. He never reached a point where he said, "I'm already virtuous enough. I no longer need to examine myself." Until his final days, he wrote reminders to himself, questioned his actions, demanded of himself to live according to his principles, because he understood that character isn't a destination you reach, but a practice you sustain. You don't become a disciplined person and then automatically remain so. You become disciplined through daily practice and remain disciplined only while you continue that practice. The difference between knowing these 10 forms and living them is the difference between a tourist visiting a foreign country and a resident living there. The tourist experiences superficially, takes photos, leaves with stories. The resident lives deeply, faces real challenges, is transformed by the experience. You can be a tourist of these ideas, experience them briefly, leave with the feeling of having learned something, or you can be a resident, commit to living according to them daily, transform yourself through that sustained practice. Epictetus was brutal with students who accumulated philosophical knowledge without behavioral change. He told them directly, "What good is knowing the theory if your life doesn't reflect the practice? What good is being able to speak eloquently about virtue if you act without virtue?" Those questions apply directly to you now. What good is having read or heard these 10 forms if tomorrow you live exactly the same? The obvious answer is, it's no good at all. Worse still, it gives you the illusion of progress without real progress. If this journey has resonated with you, If something in you recognizes the truth that you're not starting from zero but with wisdom, then you have an immediate responsibility. Not to wait until you feel ready. Not to plan how you'll start soon. To choose now, in this moment, one of these 10 forms and commit to practicing it without exception for 30 days. One form, 30 days, no negotiation. Maybe it's nightly reflection. 15 minutes each night, answering Seneca's 3 questions with brutal honesty. Maybe it's memento mori. Each morning reminding yourself this day could be your last with this purpose. Maybe it's worst-case scenario visualization, preparing your mind specifically for the resistance that's coming. Maybe it's reduction, ruthlessly eliminating everything that contaminates your ground before building. It doesn't matter which you choose. What matters is you choose one and practice it with unshakable commitment. Seneca wrote, "It is not because things are difficult that we do not dare. It is because we do not dare that they are difficult." Your restart seems impossibly difficult if you look at it as starting from zero with nothing. It seems challenging but manageable if you see it as continuing with gained wisdom. The perspective shift doesn't change external circumstances, but completely changes your capacity to respond to those circumstances. And that response capacity is the only thing that determines whether your restart will succeed. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one." Paraphrasing for this context, waste no more time consuming content about how to restart wisely. Actually, restart. Implement these forms, live them. Demonstrate them through consistent behavioral change, not through passive intellectual understanding that never becomes action. Stoic practice also recognizes you will fail. There will be days when you forget nightly reflection. There will be moments when you give in to temptation despite mental preparation. There will be situations where you act from your old version despite commitment to your new version. Those failures don't mean the practices don't work. They mean you're human. Epictetus never expected perfection. He expected honest effort toward continuous improvement. When you fail to live according to these forms, don't punish yourself with destructive guilt. Simply observe the failure with the honesty you practice in nightly reflection. Understand what caused it. Plan specifically how you'll respond better next time. Each failure is information about where your practice needs strengthening. Each stumble is opportunity to refine your approach. Each relapse is reminder of why conscious practice is necessary instead of assuming transformation is automatic once decided. Seneca observed, "Life is very short for those who forget the past, ignore the present, and fear the future." You've received these 10 forms. Now you have a simple but definitive choice. You can forget this knowledge, treat it as another piece of consumed and archived content. You can ignore the present you have, postponing action for an imaginary future that never comes. You can fear the restart, paralyzed by the possibility of failure, or you can act. Acting means choosing one form now, implementing it today, sustaining it tomorrow, repeating it for 30 days until it becomes an established habit, then adding a second form, then a third. Not all simultaneously, in an explosion of enthusiasm that burns out fast. One at a time, with patient, sustained construction that generates lasting transformation. The Stoics were never about dramatic instant change. They were about gradual, consistent improvement compounded over years. Marcus Aurelius wrote something that perfectly summarizes what you need to do now. Don't let the future disturb you. You will meet it with the same weapons of reason you use against the present. The 10 forms are those weapons of reason. They're not theoretical, they're practical. They're not for some future when you're ready. They're for the present you have now. They don't require perfect circumstances. They work with the imperfect circumstances you have. Your restart isn't about a clean slate where you pretend nothing before mattered. It's about synthesis, where everything you lived informs everything you'll build. Each past mistake is a lesson. Each past loss is wisdom. Each past failure is training. You're not starting from zero. You're starting with a complete arsenal of experience that a genuine beginner doesn't have. That's your advantage if you stop treating it as a disadvantage. Epictetus ended many of his teachings with an urgent question. How much longer will you postpone demanding the best from yourself? That question applies directly now. How much longer will you postpone implementing what you just learned? How much longer will you allow the gap between your knowledge and your action to widen? How much longer will you live below your potential because it's more comfortable than demanding yourself to grow? The answer you give to those questions, not with words but with actions in the next 24 hours, will determine whether this was a transformative moment or simply another episode of content consumption without real change. The Stoics didn't offer easy comfort. They offered difficult truth. That you have complete capacity to transform your life, but that capacity only actualizes through sustained, disciplined practice. There's no shortcut. There's no magic hack. There's only consistent work informed by proven principles. Seneca wrote in his final days something that sums it all up. It is quality of life, not duration, that matters. Your restart isn't measured by how much time you take, but by how completely you commit during that time. You can take years wasting time in comfortable mediocrity, or you can take months generating real transformation through intense practice of these forms. The choice is completely yours. No one can make it for you. No one can force you to genuinely commit. But also, no one can prevent you if you truly decide to do it. The forms are here. The wisdom of 2,000 years is available. The principles that transformed lives of slaves who became philosophers and emperors who maintained virtue are at your disposal. Only your decision to apply them is missing. And if you decide to apply them, if you decide to genuinely commit, then remember this: you're not alone on this path. Marcus Aurelius walked it in infinitely more difficult circumstances. Epictetus walked it from physical slavery. Seneca walked it in imperial courts where every day was a survival test. If they could live according to these principles in their brutal contexts, you can live them in yours, not because your context is easy, because the principles work regardless of context. When practiced with honesty and consistency, you are no longer weak. You begin with wisdom. That declaration you made at the beginning wasn't an empty phrase. It was a commitment you must now honor through action. The wisdom is in recognizing this restart isn't punishment but opportunity. The strength is in acting according to that wisdom, day after day, even when it's difficult. And the transformation is waiting for you on the other side of that sustained practice. The restart wasn't about starting. It never was. It was about continuing, but this time with open eyes, with learned lessons, with wisdom gained through experience that can't be bought or taught but only lived. Now you have that wisdom. Now you know what you didn't know before. Now you're prepared in ways you weren't before. All that remains is to decide whether you'll use that preparation or waste it lamenting it didn't come sooner. This is your moment. Not another. This one. With the life you have, with the wisdom you gained, with the time that remains, you are no longer weak. You begin with wisdom. Now prove it. Your voice matters here more than you think. Every insight you share strengthens and elevates this community, because this isn't just another space. It's a circle of people who choose to live with intention, with discipline, and with character. Each of you leaves a mark, and the reflection that receives the most support will be pinned as a banner of who we are. Not as decoration, but as a reminder of the kind of warrior who chooses to think, feel, and act with stoic clarity. Because this is a community that doesn't run from pain, it walks through it with courage. A community that doesn't look for cheap comfort, it seeks wisdom. A community that doesn't break under adversity, it turns it into strength. And if you've made it this far, it's because something inside you is already shifting. Something is waking up. Something is asking for more. So, before you leave, check the description. There you'll find the paths we created to help you keep strengthening your mind. They're not there by accident. Each one exists to help you go deeper, build inner resilience, and return again and again to that place within you where nothing and no one can take your peace. Subscribing isn't doing the podcast a favor. It's an act of respect toward yourself. It's choosing not to live on autopilot anymore. It's committing to think differently, to feel with more order, to live with more intention. Because every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we publish reflections designed to stay with you when life gets heavy, when your mind gets loud, when you need a reminder of who you are. Not following us means risking missing the one lesson you might need in the hardest moment. And if you choose to go a step further, if you choose to become a member, understand one thing clearly. You're not donating, you're sustaining a mission. Because of you, this flame stays alive. Because of you, we can keep spreading Stoicism as a refuge for millions who are fighting not to give up. Your support is what keeps this podcast alive, strong, and growing. You're not a spectator, you're part of the foundation holding this community together. I'll see you in our next Stoicism for Winners session, where we'll keep exploring the depth of Stoic wisdom applied to everyday life. In the meantime, dive into the recommended sessions in the description and continue your path. And until we cross paths again, don't forget this. You are the master of your perception, the guardian of your peace, and the warrior of your own battle. That is the legacy of Stoicism. That is the art of becoming invincible.